Researchers who take Bigfoot seriously don't take every alleged Bigfoot video seriously. In fact, they're often the first to call foul on the fakers.
3 experienced outdoorsmen, armed, capable, at home in the deep wilderness, walked into the trees in 3 different years and were carried back out as scattered bones. One was found beside a loaded handgun, still chambered, not a single shot fired. Each left a few seconds of footage behind, and in 2 of those clips, a tall, dark figure stands at the edge of the trees before it turns and is gone. The official cause of death in every case is the same single word: unknown. The loaded gun.
Police continue to investigate a rural road in Cape Breton where possible human remains were found yesterday.
Jordan Grider was 29 years old, and he was not a man who got lost. For 10 to 12 years, he had been living rough in the backcountry, and he corrected anyone who called him homeless. He had a home. He simply chose to keep it outside, in the far forests of Kentucky and upstate New York, among the rivers and trails that made up his entire world. In late September of 2018, Jordan returned to his small hometown in New Mexico to visit his father and his 5 brothers. He stayed a few weeks, then said his goodbyes. He told the family he was heading somewhere incredible, a great camping spot, and that he would be gone for months. Nobody worried. This was simply what Jordan did. In late October, he drove his pickup truck north into Minnesota, toward the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness, one of the most remote regions in the entire United States. Over 1 million acres of ancient forest, frozen lakes, and rivers that vanish into nothing. He parked at the trailhead, walked roughly 1.5 miles into the trees, and set up camp far from any other human being. He sent photos to his family and told them roughly where he was. He seemed fine. Then the snow came, and Jordan Grider disappeared. The first sign that something was wrong came in early April of 2019, when U.S. Border Patrol agents conducting a welfare check hiked into his campsite and stopped cold. There was blood everywhere, large amounts of it, soaked black into the hammock and the sleeping bag, splattered across the inside walls of the tarp at a height no fall could explain. But the snow was still several feet deep, and they could not find Jordan or anything else of him. They called it in and left. 3 weeks later, investigators returned to melted ground, and what they found changed everything. 12 bones lay scattered near the camp. Vertebrae, what appeared to be a femur, a possible forearm bone, ribs, and fragments too small to identify on sight. Some of the larger bones had been snapped. The femur had not been gnawed at the ends the way a scavenger leaves a bone. It had been broken clean across the shaft, the kind of fracture that takes 2 hands and a force well beyond anything human. They recovered his phone, his socks, a shredded jacket, and torn clothing dragged across the area. They also recovered his 9mm handgun, still loaded, still chambered. Not a single round had left it. His skull was never found. Search teams of 20 and 30 people walked grid lines through the forest. Cadaver dogs were brought in. They located 2 more bones further out, but the skull was simply gone, carried off somewhere the dogs could not follow. In August of 2020, forensic scientists confirmed through DNA that the remains belonged to Jordan Grider. The cause of death was listed as unknown, no foul play suspected, case closed. His mother, Rebecca, refused to accept that ending. She believed wolves had taken him in his sleep on that very first night of deep winter, because she knew her son would never have gone down without a fight. Investigators pushed back. Wolf attacks on humans in North America are almost unheard of, with only 2 confirmed fatal attacks across the entire continent in 20 years. And a wolf pack would have left a violent struggle behind: broken equipment, defensive wounds, overturned gear. There was none of that. Only blood and silence. A second theory, that Jordan had accidentally cut an artery while shaving with his straight razor, collapsed just as quickly. Every blade at the camp was found sheathed. Then, years later, someone began working through Jordan's social media and found 2 videos he had uploaded in the days before he vanished. The first is almost entirely darkness. The Minnesota forest at night swallows the phone's light a few feet past the lens, and out in that black, there is a sound. Low, thick, wet at the edges, almost a growl but pitched wrong, longer than a growl should run. Jordan does not speak above a whisper. He turns the camera toward it and finds nothing, only the suggestion of trees and his own breath fogging the frame. Whatever is making the sound does not move into the light and does not stop. In the second video, he is inside his tent, the nylon close and yellow around him, recording himself as the same sound returns from somewhere beyond the thin wall. And he mentions something he had never told his family. Back at the trailhead, a mile and a half behind him, there were handprints on his truck, huge ones, pressed flat against the cold metal of the door, the palms broad and the fingers far longer than his own, spread too wide for any hand he could set beside them. Something had stood at that truck in the dark, laid its hand against the steel, and walked the same mile and a half into the trees that he had. He does not say what he thinks left them. The recording ends. That is when a different theory took hold among the people studying the case. An experienced armed man with a decade of wilderness survival had been killed by something that left no defensive marks and no spent rounds, with his loaded gun still in reach, and his femur snapped rather than chewed. Whatever it was had circled the camp for days, close enough to be recorded, patient enough to wait for the dark, and strong enough to take the skull and never give it back. Whatever came for Jordan came fast, came quiet, and never once gave him the chance to pull the trigger. The shattered skull. On September 14, 2004, a wilderness survival expert named Bart Schleyer was dropped by float plane at the larger of the Reed Lakes, deep inside Canada's Yukon Territory, to hunt alone. 2 weeks later, he vanished. On October 3rd, a search team found his skull near his campsite, broken open by what appeared to be an enormous force, with bone fragments scattered across the ground around it. The rest of his body was never recovered. The most disturbing discoveries were inside his camera. Bart was not an amateur. Born in 1955 in Cheyenne, Wyoming, he had been obsessed with animals since childhood. He earned a master's degree and spent 14 years with an interagency grizzly bear study team across Montana and Wyoming. In the 1980s, he worked on the Grizzly Recovery Project inside Yellowstone. He became a world-class expert in live capture, tracking, and radio collaring, handling the most dangerous predators on the continent. He later spent months in Russia working to protect endangered Siberian tigers. He built his own bows by hand from raw wood and lit his fires by friction. With nothing but the handmade bow, he could bring down a full-grown bull moose or a North American grizzly. Everyone who knew him said the same thing. This was not a man who could be caught off guard in the wild. He arrived at Reed Lakes fully equipped, with a tent, water containers, an inflatable boat, a camera, a hunting rifle, his handmade bow and arrows, and at least 2 weeks of supplies. On September 30th, when he had been out of contact for several days, his family called police, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police launched a full search. Near the lake, they found his inflatable boat completely undamaged. About 60 meters into the forest, they found his collapsed tent and his backpack, which still held bear spray, a knife, a camera, and a radio receiver. A short distance away, his deerskin quiver and handmade bow were leaning neatly against a tree, set in place rather than dropped. Further along, they found a camouflage face mask with blood on it. On October 3rd, a civilian team conducting a closer grid search found the skull in a sparse patch of forest. It had been struck with tremendous force, badly broken, fragments thrown out around it. And yet it was resting on a rock almost as if it had been set down there. Forensic examination confirmed it belonged to Bart Schleyer. No other part of his body was ever found. Police first suspected a grizzly since the region was thick with them, but that theory ran into problems almost immediately. The campsite had not been disturbed, and his food still sat in the pot where he had cooked it. A grizzly's nose would have led it straight to that food, and a bear takes the food. Nothing had been touched. The ground around the skull showed no signs of a struggle, no broken vegetation, no torn earth. When a bear attack is prolonged and tears apart everything around it. His camouflage pants were found completely intact, with no rips and no blood, as though they had been set aside deliberately. The case was officially left unsolved, with a bear recorded as the most likely explanation anyone could put on paper. The documented cases on this channel are not folklore. They are real people, real disappearances, and real forensic evidence drawn from the files left behind when official searches gave up. And for anyone choosing to follow them, the next case is the worst of the three, and a subscription is the only way to reach it. Other explanations were weighed and set aside. The idea that a bear had ambushed him in the water, which might explain the neatly placed pants and the gear staged for quick access, falls apart on one detail. No animal on Earth other than a human shatters a skull the way Bart's was shattered, and a bear does not place it on a rock and leave. A sudden medical emergency seemed almost impossible for a 49-year-old in extraordinary condition, with no known illness. And so, the discussion turned to the Wendigo, a figure from Canadian Indigenous legend, massive, cannibalistic, human-shaped, and trailed by a foul stench that arrives before it does. There is no proof the Wendigo exists. What unsettled people was how exactly that description matched another, human-shaped, powerfully built, foul-smelling, enormous. Then there was the camera. One photograph showed a line of massive barefoot prints running along the edge of the lake. Prints Bart appears to have taken himself, crouching close to the ground to frame them. With no reference object beside them, their exact size cannot be measured, but they clearly were not his. And there was a video, 2 or 3 seconds long, showing a tall, entirely dark, human-shaped figure standing near his campsite. It does not run. It turns, unhurried, and walks into the trees, and the clip ends. To the researchers who studied these cases, that footage was the answer. The Yukon sits in a region of ancient silent wilderness bordering British Columbia and Alberta, among the densest Bigfoot sighting territories in North America. Hunters there have reported finding a dead moose with a similarly shattered skull, its body left on a rock. A creature of the size described, perhaps 500 pounds of muscle, could crush a human skull in its hands and carry a body off without leaving a trace. Bart knew grizzlies better than almost anyone alive. He had no knowledge of whatever this was, no way to read its signs, and no idea it had been standing close enough to film him. The collection site. On August 10th, 2018, a team of biologists hiking through the Olympic Mountains of Washington State to study marmots made a discovery that stopped them cold. Far from any trail, in one of the most remote corners of the park, they found clothing, equipment, and human bones scattered across a rocky ridge more than 5,000 feet above sea level. The next morning, rangers returned and found more skeletal remains, a wallet, a phone, and 3 arrows standing straight up in the ground. The bones did not all belong to one person. The Clallam County Sheriff's Office later confirmed that the site held the remains of Jacob Gray, alongside fragments from 2 other people who had vanished years earlier, a hunter who disappeared in 2010 and a female hiker who vanished in 2012. This was not a campsite, and it was not a random spot. The way the remains lay, sorted and apart, led investigators to treat it as something closer to a collection point, and a darker word took hold for it: a nest. Jacob Gray was 22. He had grown up in Santa Cruz, California, a surfer and climber who worked at a rock climbing gym, rode his bicycle everywhere, and called himself a wanderer. He had spent months planning a cross-country journey, the Olympics first, then east across the country, then south to Florida to see his grandmother. His parents, Randy and Laura, had recently divorced, and the news had hit him hard enough to show his depression. He had left community college to work and save for the trip. His mother said the mountains were something the 2 of them had always shared, the place he went whenever life got heavy. On the evening of April 4th, 2017, Jacob set out alone on his bicycle, towing a trailer his father had won at a trade show and converted into a compact carrier, almost a small pickup bed on wheels. It held everything he needed: food, an emergency kit, a tent, a water filter, a compound bow, and arrows. The bow was for food and for protection. His destination was the Hoh Lake area, deep inside Olympic National Park, a landscape that runs from rainforest to glaciated peaks on a peninsula surrounded on 3 sides by the Pacific. Since being named a biosphere reserve in 1976, nearly 96% of its wilderness has remained untouched. On April 6th, a woman driving Sol Duke Hot Springs Road noticed a bicycle and tarp-covered trailer sitting still about 6.5 miles up from the highway. She photographed it and reported it. Rangers found a phone book inside, listing the owner as 22-year-old Jacob Gray, but there was no sign of Jacob himself. Standing in the soil next to the bike were 4 arrows, pushed straight down into the ground. Nobody knew what they meant. Roughly 30 officers and several dogs searched the area. Jacob's parents rushed to the park and printed flyers for every entrance and rest stop. In July, more than 100 volunteers searched the Sol Duke River. After 3 months, there was not a single trace of him. Then came August 10th, 2018, 16 months later, when the Marmot research team reached that remote, treeless ridge. In April, when Jacob disappeared, the same ground would have been buried under deep snow in avalanche country that even experienced mountaineers struggle to reach. The rangers who arrived the next morning smelled the site before they could see it. a thickness in the cold air that turned them quiet as they climbed the last of the slope. They found clothing fragments, a wallet with Jacob's cash and bank cards still inside, a phone, a collapsed tent, and a backpack some distance away holding a water filter and canned food. Beside the tent, 3 more arrows had been pushed straight into the ground. Forensic examination confirmed Jacob's leg bone. Alongside it lay pelvic bones and ribs belonging to the 2 other missing people, a 34-year-old hunter who had vanished in 2010 with a large caliber rifle and a machete, and a 33-year-old hiker who had gone into the park alone in 2012. Both of their skeletons were more heavily bleached. They had been there far longer. 3 people, 3 separate years, all brought to the same hidden place 6,000 feet up, the remains lying separated by type rather than left where a body falls. Police ruled out human murder for several reasons. No killer could operate at that elevation in a wilderness with no shelter for dozens of miles, and there were no campfire remains, no footprints, no tools, none of the base a person would require to return again and again. The untouched wallet and cash eliminated almost every human motive. An animal attack was considered, but one of the victims was an experienced hunter who had disappeared with a large caliber rifle, and no known predator gathers remains from 3 different years into one place and sorts them by bone. That behavior requires intelligence, and it requires hands. Then they reviewed Jacob's phone. One video, only a few seconds long, had been recorded by holding the phone up to a pair of binoculars, the frame shaking with the effort of keeping a distance. At the far end of that frame, near his tent, a massive figure stands, covered in black fur from head to foot, human in shape and far too large for it. And as the lens steadies, it turns slowly and walks into the trees. A standard tent stands roughly 90 to 110 centimeters tall. Even accounting for the distance, the figure towered over it. Tanya Barbera, who led the search team from a well-known Sasquatch investigation organization, had already been working the case, brought in by Jacob's father Randy after the official search stalled. When she saw the video, she stated publicly that Jacob had most likely been killed by a Sasquatch living in the Olympic wilderness. Jacob's phone log showed one more thing, an attempted emergency call on the night of April 5th that never connected, because the signal that high was too weak to reach anyone. He had tried to call for help, and the mountain had eaten the call. The arrows pushed into the earth at both the bike and the camp may have been markers, a trail left for whoever came looking, but whatever already lived in those mountains had been watching him long before he ever knew it was there. A bow could not save Jacob, and a hunter's rifle could not save the man who came before him. After the remains were found, Randy hiked up to that ridge and found one last thing, a single finger bone. He did not hand it to police. He buried it on the mountain, built a cross from rope and wood, and left it there for his son. What the wilderness keeps. 3 men, 3 separate years, one hidden place, 6,000 feet up, where their remains were carried and set down apart from one another, with footage left waiting on their phones and arrows pushed into the earth like markers nobody read in time. This channel exists to keep these names from vanishing a second time, and a new case is added each time the evidence allows it to be told. Far to the east, in the Boundary Waters, the snow that covered Jordan Grider's camp has fallen and melted many times over now. His skull was never recovered. It is still out there somewhere in that ancient forest, past the reach of the dogs and the grid lines. Carried off in the dark by something that took its time, that filmed easily and was never once filmed clearly, that snapped the bone and left the loaded gun untouched. The tree line at the edge of that campsite has not changed. It stands black and close against the snow, exactly as it stood the night the sound came out of it, and somewhere behind it, the thing that has learned every shadow of that forest is still watching the next man walk in.